Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar. We will get started at 7:30 as scheduled. In the meantime, I'll play a short video while you wait. Enjoy.
Optimizing the health and performance of your sheep when marking and weaning will ensure more and heavier lambs to market or joining. Weaners are particularly susceptible to disease and parasites because their immunity is not yet fully developed. The additional stresses of separation, handling, transitioning to a forage-based diet and naturally low levels of trace minerals can further suppress the immune system. It is important that weaners are protected from disease and parasites so they can express their full genetic potential. Wean lambs between 12 and 16 weeks of age to maximize the amount of time available for weaners to reach market specifications and mating weight, and for use to recover body condition before the next joining. Always conduct marking operations in clean yards, close to the paddock being grazed, ideally about 2 weeks after the last possible lambing day. A comprehensive animal health program at weaning can help to optimize growth and development in prime lambs, maiden ewes and wethers by topping up levels of essential trace minerals to boost the immune system, by protecting weaners against parasites and minimizing pasture contamination, by providing immunity against clostridial diseases, cheesy gland and botulism. Wean onto clean, quality pastures with good access to water and shade. If possible, prepare a high-quality pasture of mixed perennial and or legume species. In cropping zones, fodder crops or good quality stubble are also options. Avoid grass seed infestation, and optimal lamb survival rates are achieved when weaning weights exceed 20 kilograms. If practical, draft weaners into weight groups and provide supplementary feeding or access to better pastures as necessary. Choosing a drench that works is critical. And always regard purchased lambs as having an unknown worm status. There are many considerations to take into account when managing internal parasites, including knowing which drenches work on your farm, monitoring worm burdens, integrating combination drenches into your program, so using the drench that actually works, and quarantine drenching. Worm air count reduction tests can determine your drench resistance status. It is recommended that these be conducted every 2 to 3 years. Worm air counts should be conducted every 4 to 8 weeks, depending on the environmental conditions and worm challenge. Combination drenches like tridectin should be considered for inclusion in your program. Most critical to choosing a drench is choosing the one that works on your property. Tridectin delivers the trusted power of moxidectin in a unique 3-way formulation and may be your ideal weaner drench because it provides added benefits to your lambs at weaning. Firstly, fast, powerful and lasting broad-spectrum control of worms with single, double or triple resistance to white, clear, mectin or monopentyl drenches, and the shortest ESI of any 3-way drench, 17 days. For those in fluke endemic regions, effective treatment of fluke should be considered. Flucazole C is the only product for sheep that controls fluke down to 2 weeks of age. Multimin helps to optimize immune function, which is important for vaccine response, and to reduce the incidence of disease in young livestock. Even a small improvement in weaner survival rate can pay for the cost of treatment. Routine vaccination is critical. Administer an effective clostridial vaccine and other vaccines at marking, followed by a booster 4 to 6 weeks later to achieve adequate levels of immunity in young sheep. Using multimin at the same time as vaccines has been shown to increase antibody levels when compared to using vaccines alone. Ask your local Verbac area sales manager about implementing the Target Sheep program on your property today.
All right, hope you all enjoyed that video. For those of you who did turn up early, if you didn't, that is on our website, and I'll provide a link to that later on in the webinar. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 6th Target Sheep webinar of 2020 and the 7th in the series presented by Virbac. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name's Alex, and I'm the product manager for the sheep parasiticides range at Virbac, and I'll be your moderator for this evening's event. Tonight we have the pleasure of having Dr. Tim Elliott, Dr. Paula Gonzalez-Rivers, and Dr. George Cox on board to present on how you can optimize the health and productivity of your flock at weaning. A bit of housekeeping to get started with. You should be able to hear us, but we cannot hear you. If you are having any technical issues, please call or text the number on your screen, and I will do my best to help you out. If you do have any questions for our presenters, please type them into the question box provided, and we'll address them at the end of the session. Please be as clear as possible when asking questions so that we can give you the best possible answers. By attending tonight, we are giving you access to a Target Sheep weaning booklet and TechNote developed by Dr. Tim Elliott. To access these materials, go to the Handouts tab on your GoToWebinar panel and double-click to download. We are also giving away a Tracking 1 Litre pack tonight. At the end of the webinar, there will be a survey that will pop up on your screen. Simply answer the questions in this survey to go on to the draw to win, and you'll be notified via email within 24 hours if you've been successful. All right, so getting back into it then, as I said, tonight we are joined by Dr. Tim Elliott. Tim is a researcher with a particular interest in production animal parasitology and drug resistance. Tim has worked with many pharmaceutical companies, universities, veterinarians, and government departments to help reduce the impact of parasites on animal production. He has experience designing parasite control programs for sheep farmers in the New England region of New South Wales, where drench resistance is highly prevalent. Tim completed his PhD at La Trobe University, studying the prevalence of liver fluke in the Gippsland Dairy region of Victoria. Tim's work has been published in internationally renowned journals and has presented his work all around Australia for scientific audiences and farmer groups. Dr. Paula Gonzalez-Rivers is also joining us tonight. Paula has a Master's in Animal Studies from the University of Queensland, a PhD in Agricultural Sciences, and brings 5 years of experience in small and large animal practice in Chile. She also has 6 years of experience in research applied to nutrition and heat stress in ruminants. During her Master's, Dr. Gonzalez-Rivers studied the role of phosphorus in beef cattle, while in her PhD, she focused on nutritional influences on heat stress. She has also completed a postdoctorate fellowship in meat quality in feedlot cattle. And finally, tonight we have Dr. George Cox. Dr. George Cox is an experienced livestock veterinarian, having spent time in mixed rural practice in clinical product development and evaluation, training, marketing management, and technical services. George is a member of the sheep, camelid, and goat vet and Australian cattle vet interest groups of the AVA and has a keen interest in livestock health and production. Before I hand over to Paula to begin tonight's webinar, we do have a few poll questions to go through. These questions will help us get a better understanding of who you are and what information will be most beneficial to you. These poll questions are anonymous, so please be honest with your response. So I'll put the first poll question up now for you. And it's a nice, easy one to begin with. Which state are you from? All right, we'll close that one in 3, 2, 1. So we've got 50% from New South Wales and the ACT, 39% from Vic and Tas, and 11% from WA. No South Australians or Queenslanders tonight. Next question. Are you a prime lamb or wool producer? We'll close that one in 3, 2, 1. So tonight we have 38% prime lamb producers, 23% wool, and 38% are a combination. And final question before we get started. When do you wean? We'll close that one in 3, 2, 1. So obviously very topical for many people out there, with 63% weaning in October and November, 13% in December and January, and 19% in August and September. Thanks for that, guys. I will have many more poll questions throughout tonight's webinar. I will now pass over to Paula, who will take us through the importance of nutrition at weaning.
Thanks, Alex. Okay, here we are. Oh, good.
Perfect.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks, Alex, for the introduction. In this part of the webinar, we'll be discuss the importance of trace minerals at weaning and how the change in pasture condition can affect the trace mineral status of the animals. Although this was a drier than average winter in Australia as a whole, there are large areas of sheep-producing regions that have received above average rainfall in one or more months this year. And many livestock regions across Victoria, for example, have experienced one of the best winters and the lead up into spring for some time. The months ahead look also really good in terms of rainfall for most parts of Australia. But what does the change in weather condition mean for pasture growth, pasture nutrient content, and animal performance at weaning? High rainfall and large amount of green feed available has increased the risk of trace mineral deficiencies, such as selenium, copper, zinc, manganese, and cobalt in sheep. Sheep normally ingest several essential trace minerals from soil intake, which accounts between 10 to 25% of their dry matter intake when they graze short pasture after a dry summer and before the autumn break. This year, however, the early season pasture growth reduced the intake of trace minerals in the soil, and the rapid pasture growth and in high rainfall areas reduced the levels of trace minerals in green feed. Growing lambs at weaning have a higher demand for trace minerals to sustain growth and immunity, and are more likely to suffer clinical and marginal deficiencies in special cobalt, selenium, zinc, manganese, and copper. Cobalt is necessary for the synthesis of vitamin B12 in the rumen. Vitamin B12 is important for energy and protein utilization in ruminant. Its deficiency is associated to low cobalt soils and fast pasture growth in high rainfall areas. Rumen microorganisms need cobalt to synthesize B12. Requirements of B12 increase in rapid growing animals during pregnancy and early lactation. Although B12 concentration is high in colostrum and milk during early lactation, the synthesis of B12 in the rumen in young animals occurs only by 6 to 8 weeks of age, depending on the intake on dry feed. Therefore, supplemental B12 is recommended at weaning. Lambs and mature sheep are most at risk of B12 deficiency than adult cattle. B12 deficiency is secondary to cobalt deficiency and produces anemia, anorexia, poor growth, poor fertility, and low production. Adequate soil management and B12 or cobalt supplementation is required in cobalt deficient areas. If you decide to use commercially available products containing B12, it's important to read the labels. since products containing hydroxycobalamin, a longer-acting form of B12, are preferred than products containing cyanocobalamin. Hydroxycobalamin is contained in high B12 and Clostridial vaccines from Vervac. Other essential trace minerals are copper, selenium, zinc, and manganese. They are necessary for normal metabolism, growth, healthy skin and mucous membranes, hoof structure, wool quality, optimal fertility, immunity, and antioxidant status. Those trace minerals are key components of a healthy immune system, so deficient lambs may become more susceptible to infections and diseases. However, supplementation of trace minerals, copper, selenium, zinc, and manganese is not always easy because those trace minerals have low oral absorption and are affected by antagonists in the rumen. Antagonist reactions occur inside the rumen where macro and trace minerals and other nutrients ingested in feed and water bind together and form complexes of difficult absorption. As a consequence, most of the trace minerals are wasted in urine and feces and are not used by the animals. Strong antagonists of trace minerals in the rumen are iron, sulfur, molybdenum, calcium, and phosphorus, either present in the feed or in the water or used as fertilizers in the pasture. One of the most important trace mineral complexes in sheep is between copper, molybdenum, and sulfur, producing secondary copper deficiencies, affecting immunity, fertility, and growth. This occurs when excess of sulfur and molybdenum are accumulated in pasture, reducing the absorption and utilization of copper that otherwise will appear normal in the pasture mineral analysis. Trace minerals are required in small amounts in the diet, as milligrams per kilo of dry matter or parts per million, and trace minerals requirements vary with the reproductive cycles of the animals. Large requirements are observed at weaning and also are associated to fertility and lambing. Despite the lower requirement, below optimal levels of trace mineral intake affect significantly animal performance. Imbalances in trace mineral intake during early growth affect lamb immunity, growth, general health, and future performance. The classical signs of copper and zinc deficiency in sheep is discolor coat and bad quality wool. Of copper deficiency is swayback or enzootic ataxia. A condition causes paralysis in the hind limbs of newborn and very young lambs, and of selenium deficiency is white muscle disease. Copper and manganese deficiencies are also associated to spontaneous fractures in lambs. Marginal levels of trace minerals are not related with classical signs of deficiency, but are related with reduced immunity and performance in weaning lambs, because those trace minerals play crucial roles in growth and in the immune response. Marginal levels of trace minerals during the growing period also affect the future fertility of ewe lambs. Recently, we saw in the news that a large number of lambs were exhibiting brittle ribs post-slaughter that were highly susceptible to cracking during deboning due to copper deficiencies in South Australia. However, those animals appear absolutely normal, and was only the feedback from the processing plant that uncovered the problem. This is a clear example of how sometimes trace mineral deficiencies are not visible but economically important. Therefore, adequate supplementation strategies of several trace minerals must be reviewed to improve animal performance. Here we have another question for you. This is a question about your current trace mineral supplementation strategies at Weaning. Back to you, Alex.
Thank you, Paula. That poll question will be up on your screen now. So at Weaning, do you use any of the following? We'll close that one in 3, 2, 1, and I'll share it this time. So 20% use selenium drench or selenium in their drench or vaccine. 5% use vitamin B12 on its own. 35% use selenium and vitamin B12 together. 5% use Sullivan, and 35% use a combination of other. Ella, back to you.
Thanks, everyone. So indeed, there are different forms of trace mineral supplementation. Oral minerals as blocks, loose mixes, or water solution have variable intake and palatability. They are affected by antagonists in the rumen, and they are not designed to address critical events of the production cycle. Oral intake of minerals is dependent on voluntary feed and water intake, which in turn vary according to production, physiological stage, environmental conditions, and also animal behavior. This variability can be minimized through the administration of injectable trace minerals. By injecting trace minerals, they are delivered directly into the animal for use by the tissues. The trace minerals bypass the gut, reducing the antagonist reaction. But it's important to notice that not all injectable trace minerals are the same. Some contains only one trace minerals with a very long acting period of activity, not being able to raise the levels to address critical events of the production cycle. A combination of several trace minerals have demonstrated to be the most effective form of supplementation because during high demand periods, the requirements of several trace minerals increase at the same time, and trace minerals have complementary function in different bodily systems. This is why we recommend Multimin. Multimin is an injectable trace mineral formulation which is rapidly absorbed and readily utilized, producing a strategic and rapid mineral delivery at times of high demand. Multimin is especially formulated for sheep and contains copper, selenium, zinc, and manganese. We also have a unique copper-free formulation for sheep and cattle. Multimin enhances the antioxidant system to improve the health and performance of livestock to cover high demand periods. Multimin is scientifically proved. After subcutaneous injection, Multimin is absorbed in 8 hours and reaches adequate liver levels in only 24 hours. Multimin is a top-up trace mineral supplement designed to complement good nutrition programs, and is not designed to be used instead of good nutrition, which means that Multimin can be used at the same time as oral trace minerals included in the diet. While oral trace minerals help to meet daily requirements for animal maintenance and avoid deficiencies, Multimin is a top-up to supplement the animals during periods of large trace mineral utilization or high demand periods, such as weaning, joining, pregnancy, and lambing, for animal performance. Multimin protects the immune system and improves fertility by enhancing the antioxidant system. Multimin has demonstrated benefits for fertility and immunity. Multimin increases the number of lambs born by reducing embryo losses. This also brings the benefits of a tighter lambing pattern. As a consequence, we have a larger number of animals which are heavier at the point of sale and more sexually mature at first joining. Multimin improves the specific and non-specific immunity, increases postnatal survival, reduces the disease incidences, and increases vaccine responses. Taking this all together, Multimin produces a higher return on the investment. Here we have another question for you about your current weaning practices.
Thank you, Paola. That poll question is on your screen now. You can tick more than one answer. So your weaning program includes drench, vaccination, Multimin, none of the above. Tick as many as you like. Close that one in 3, 2, 1. So 95% will give a drench at weaning, 68% will give a vaccination, and 16% are currently giving Multimin as well. But everyone is treating their animals at weaning, which is fantastic to see. Ella, back to you.
Thank you. We recommend using Multimin in preparation of weaning or at weaning and associated to drenches and vaccines. to support the antioxidant system, innate immunity, growth, health, and immune responses to vaccination. Used milk is low in trace minerals, and by the time of weaning, the lambs will have reduced reserves of trace minerals in the body. For best results, multimin can be used every 3 months in preparation to high-demand periods, such as joining, lambing, transport, or heat stress events. Multimin is a registered pharmaceutical product. Follow the dose rates online on the label and don't exceed them. Dosing to the lightest instead of the heaviest in the mob is a very good rule of thumb. Use multimin in weaning lambs of more than 20 kilos. Don't use multimin in emaciated or sick animals. Although we recommend using multimin with other animal health products, we don't recommend using multimin at the same time of other injectable products, drenches, boluses, or vaccines containing copper or selenium. Just like other drugs, more is not necessarily better. Multimin has a very low rate of adverse events, but excessive copper and selenium can be toxic. Multimin is designed to be injected subcutaneously. For best practice, we highly recommend applying at the side of the neck in the area shown on the diagram and separated from other injectable animal health products. This means injecting a different side of the neck. So this is the end of my presentation. If you have any question, please type in the chat box and we can discuss at the end of this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Paola. Thank you, Paola. Yeah, very well done. Fantastic. Thanks for that. Before I do pass over to Tim to talk about the drenching side of things, I will put one more poll question up on the screen. It's fitting. Do you currently drench at weaning? Yes, I use 1 active. Yes, I use 2 actives. Yes, a minimum of 3. Or no, I do not. Or I am unsure. I'll close that one in 3, 2, 1. So a bit of a mix here. 12% use 1 active only, 59% use 2 actives, and 18% use a minimum of 3. Thank you for that, guys. And I'll now pass over to Tim.
Excellent. Thanks very much for that, Alex, and thanks everyone for coming tonight. I'll flick around to this one. So, as Alex was saying, a bit of my background is a lot of sheep and cattle background, and mainly focusing on parasites of livestock, and focusing really in on the actual resistance status of these parasites and how we're actually starting to really have major issues with the drenches at the moment. And we want to try and make sure that we keep those drenches working and use integrated parasite management. So one of the first things we really need to think about is, why do we drench weaner sheep? Why do we drench in general? I don't know anyone who drenches sheep for fun. I mean, the main reason why we drench is for profit. And whether that profit is growing more wool, growing more meat, stopping them dying if they're getting a big heap of barber's pole. But the thing you always need to remember whenever you're going to drench a mob of sheep or to buy a drum of drench, is that drenching is an investment. It's an investment into the health of that sheep. So you want to make sure that you're getting a return on investment. And the only way you can really do that is by making sure you're using it in an effective drench, because that $600 drum of drench may seem dearer than the $300 drum, but if the $300 drum doesn't work, it's actually become a cost. So hopefully by the end of this, when you're thinking about your drenching, you should be thinking about what you're going to get back from that drench, not how much it costs. Now, the big thing is for weaning, this is probably one of the most important drenches in your whole drench regime for your sheep. This one, and it's mainly to do with, it's such a high stress event for the animal. I mean, you've just ripped it off mum, you've put it in amongst all its other little friends, you put it in a new paddock, you've probably vaccinated it, you've guarded it, so you put a lot of stresses on it, and now you say, okay, little fella, go out there and grow. So it's an extremely stressful event. Their immune system is very, very low. So we want to try and give them the best opportunity that we can. So the first thing we really need to think about when you're looking at drenches is what type of worms do you have on your farm? I see we've got people from Western Australia, quite a few from New South Wales. We've got different areas, and different areas have different worms. So we have the main ones over here, barbless pole worm. We probably all sheep farmers know that. This is the one that will kill sheep very, very quickly, lays a lot of eggs, and sucks blood. Small brown stomach worm, we've got people from WA, probably the biggest problem over there. Not as pathogenic, but still a huge, huge issue. And there's the same with black scale worm. But interestingly, we have this guy here, which I think is a little bit underrated in the worm world, called Nematodes, the thin-necked intestinal worm. In lambs, like weaned lambs, this is a cracking parasite, and it only takes very low numbers in the fecal egg count, and you can get a lot of scouring. So hopefully by the end of tonight, we'll try and get you guys to do some fecal egg counts. Whenever you see this guy around, this thin-necked intestinal worm, just start to worry a little bit, because it is underrated, and it gets very similar signs to a black scale worm. So the basic parasite life cycle, if we go across here, we have an adult parasite worm sitting here. It lays eggs into the digester. The digester goes out the back, and it lands out in the dung pad. In ideal conditions, 25, 26 degrees, high humidity, that little egg sitting in the dung pad can grow into what's called the L3, which is the infective stage. And then another sheep comes along, eats a blade of grass with this larvae sitting on it, and goes back into the animal. 21 days later, that new larvae has turned into an adult worm and to start laying eggs. So you can see within 21 days here and 7 days here, you can go through a whole life cycle. So 1 month, this can happen. So numbers can build up very, very quickly. And it's important that you know what type of worms you have on your farm, because they all act slightly differently and have got slight different trigger points in regards to fecal egg counts. So we know that they take 7 days to hatch on the pasture, 21 days to grow up in the actual animal, but most of the time, most of your parasites are sitting out on the pasture. And when they're on the pasture, they're in that first 5 centimeters, because if you think how the dung pad gets dropped down here, the egg hatch, these larvae don't have legs or anything like that. They don't have a lot of energy. They don't eat, drink. They've only got the energy reserves that they've hatched with. So they can't crawl up blades of grass. So they stay in this first 5 centimeters in the pasture and maybe a little bit underneath in the soil. So that's very, very important because we need to try and keep the grass high enough that the animals are not grazing down here. When animals are grazing right down onto the ground level, that's high level parasites, and that's where you're going to get lots and lots of worms. The other thing we need to think about is what you have to do with your lambing paddock and your weaning paddock is preparation. So we know that we have to prepare paddocks for our lambing ewes so that the lambs get the best start. We also have to do the exact same thing with our weaners. And the reason why is because we want to try and let those parasites die on the pasture. Now, the weird thing is that the hotter it is, the quicker they die. So when you see here at 35 degrees, you'll kill 90% of the worms within about 40, 50 days. But when a lot of the people here, we're weaning in October, so we've gone through the winter months, we actually have to lock a paddock up for the lambs with the weaners quite a bit longer than what we do for the ewes. The general rule of thumb is minimum of 3 months, but over those cooler periods, you may have to lock it up for longer. So by the time you start putting the rams out with the ewes, you should be thinking about what weaning paddock you're going to use and begin to think about what sort of preparation you're going to do and when you're going to lock that up to put those lambs on. So one of the things people say is we're big on doing fecal egg counts. And the other way that you can think about it is there's 2 different types of drenching. There's tactical drenching and strategic drenching. So tactical drenching, I like to say, is think of a tank. So in tactical drenching, we go out and we have a look, we do a fecal egg count, and we say the animals have got a high burden. We need to actually go in there and drench those animals. For strategic drenching, we want to try and knock out the tanks when they're still in the factory. And the reason why strategic drenching is not based on fecal egg count is it's based on a stressor in the animal's life or a management practice. In this case, it's weaning. So we don't need to do a fecal egg count when we go to wean our lambs because they should be drenched regardless. And I see 95% of people are drenching their lambs at weaning, which is fantastic. But then the other $1 million question is what type of drench will I use get a weaning, and what type of drench is the weaning drench. So for me, it's straight up the strategic drench. You don't have to think about it. It should be just done. The other strategic drenches you think about is your pre-lambing drench and your summer drench. Now, these can be planned out at the start of the year, and it's a really good way when you're starting to design a parasite program is to get the strategic drenches done first, and then you can work on the tactical drenches later. With that, I will flick back past to Alex, and we've got another poll question.
Great, thanks, Tim. Yep, final poll question for this evening. Have you conducted an FECRT before? Yes, in the last year. Yes, in the last 3 years. No, or unsure. We'll close that one in 3, 2, 1. So 41% have done an FECRT before in the last year. 18% have done one in the last 3 years, and 41% have not conducted one before. Thanks, guys. Tim, back to you.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Alex. That's really good to see that 41% have done a fecal egg count reduction test in the last 1 year, or and 18% in the last 3 years, because it's vital. Because when people come in and say, what drench should I use? And they go, oh, okay. And usually, as soon as someone asks me, what drench should I use, all these other questions should get thrown back at them. And basic rules of thumb is we need to use effective drenches. And we can only really work that out by when you've done a fecal egg count reduction test. If you haven't done one of those, you could do a drench check, but that's sort of just one drench at a time. And when we're looking at drench efficacy, the cutoff for resistance is when we're not killing 95% or more of the parasites. If it goes below 95%, we classify that drench as being resistant. And ideally, we want it to be killing above 98%. We want to be leaving very, very few worms behind, because the more worms we leave behind, the more they breed, the more eggs they go on pasture, and the more that resistance genes are passed around. So one of the other things to talk about is single active, dual actives, triple actives. In veterinary parasitology, particularly with sheep, and now more so into cattle, we're really starting to push dual actives and triple actives. We want to try and get as many different ways to hit that parasite to get rid of it, to kill it. And it's a lot harder for worms to become resistant to the triple actives and the dual actives than what it is with the single actives. And if you're using long-acting products, whether you use a long-acting product at a weaning dose is pretty debatable, but some people may do it, but you may be using it as a pre-lammer. Long-acting products have definitely got their place, and I think if you do it, you just have to make sure you prime, so that's coming in with an unrelated drench at the same time as you're giving the long-acting, and do a fecal egg count at day 50 just to ensure that that long-acting product is still working well. So setting up a fecal egg count reduction test. This is going to take 2 to 3 people about a day if you want to test, say, 6 or 7 different drenches. Here's a picture here. This one was setting up a fecal egg count reduction test for cattle, but it's exactly the same principle. You need the drenches, you need a set of scales, you need gloves, you need syringes. But the first thing you want to do is select a mob of young sheep. Now, I would not recommend doing it at your weaning dose, but it could be a good time to do a fecal egg count reduction test after your weaning dose. So maybe 4 to 6 weeks after you've given them the weaning dose, do a fecal egg count just to ensure they've got worms. And we really like using young sheep because they have a very low immune response, and we get much better counts. So the first thing we want to do is make sure they've got worms. We want an egg count for a mob of over 300. If you're in a barless pole area, we'd like it over 500 eggs per gram. So what we do is we select 12 animals per group. So you run a race up, and you go through and you'll tag 12 animals with, say, a green ear tag, and that may be the triple drench. And then they might get a orange ear tag, which might be the moxidectin drench. And what you do is then you go back through the race, you weigh each of those animals, and then you dose them with that selected drench according to the color. Come back 14 days later, and we collect samples. So you collect them straight out of the rectum of the animal, and you put them in the individual boxes, and they go back to the lab to get fecal egg counts done. Now, we really say we'd rather have ear tags, because sometimes spray marker can wear off, and you don't want to have that question where, oh, is that a red spray marker on its head or is it a orange? You're not too sure. Ear tags, I think, are a lot better way to do it. They're just a lot more visual and there's less chance for error. So you send this off to the lab, they do fecal egg counts, and they must do cultures. And a culture will tell you what type of worms you have, whether you have barber's pole, small brown stomach worm, black scour. Because when you're doing a fecal egg count, you're only looking at the eggs. Eggs look like eggs. So it's really important that you get the identification of the worms. And then later on, you'll get the report that says what drenches are working on your farm against what type of parasites. Now, this is some worm resistance data from 2009 to 2012, so a little while ago now. But you can look across here, we have the different types of drenches. So the whites, the clears, so the whites like the BZ, so Valbicin, Oxfen. Clears are your levamisols. So these are some of our older drenches, been around for quite a while, and the percentage of farms that have resistance to these chemicals is quite high. And if you look at any type of worm, 96% of the farms had resistance to these drenches. We keep rolling down. We go here. This is Naphthalifos. So this is your powder drenches like your Polax, Ramiton. They were so-so against your scour worms, but very effective against your barber's pole worm. We roll into the mectins. So we have ivermectin, avamectin, and moxidectin. And that's the way that their potency is as well. Ivermectin was the first one, avamectin was the second one, and moxidectin was the third. And we get better efficacy with the moxidectin. It's the second generation of the mectins, and it's the better mectin to be using, we think. Then we start getting into the combinations. We whiten your clears, and we get better increase because we're hitting that dual active side of it. This one we don't get anymore. That one's off the market. Here we start combining products with our Naphthalifos, so whitened clears. And as you can see, less and less farms have got resistance. And the more and more combinations we use, the less and less resistance occurs, because we're really hitting with those double and triple punches. So it's really important that we start to bring more and more dual, triple, quad actives into our drenching regime, because they get resistance very quickly to single actives on their own. So then we go to our virtual store now. So you've walked into your reseller and you're trying to work out what type of weaning dose to use. You might not have really had an integrated parasite management plan done. You haven't done a drench control plan where you've planned out your whole year. And now you're just thinking, okay, what am I going to use? So if we work down here, these were very popular 15 years ago. And these were the lamb drenches. And the reason why they're lamb drenches, if we have a look at the label, is because they've got praziquantel. Now, even though there's two active ingredients here, they both work on different parasites. The levamisole only works against the nematode, so the barber's pole, but the praziquantel only works against the tapeworm. Now, lambs are very susceptible to tapeworm, but the actual negative impact that tapeworm have is very controversial. And the general consensus is they don't really do a lot. So we roll back down, we can go to our mid and narrow spectrum. So we have a narrow spectrum drench here, which is glazanol, so it's only single active. The other really important thing is this drench, it only kills blood-sucking parasites, such as barber's pole and liver fluke. So you're not going to be knocking out any of your scour worms with this one. We come across to here, we get another a lamb drench. Once again, the praziquantel doing the work for the tapeworm. We have moxidectin in this one, so the stronger of the mectins, but we've still got a single active. So we roll up and we get into some dual actives. So here we have duocare. So we have a levamisole and a fenbendazole. So it's a white and clear combination. And we've got not too bad ESIs and meat withhold, so 14 days. But as we saw on that other slide, we're seeing quite a bit of resistance to both of these guys. Another very popular drench is Weaning. Fantastic because it gives them that vaccine top up. So you're doing two jobs with one. So they're getting their booster and they're also getting a drench. But we're only getting that single active again. We're only getting the moxidectin doing the work. And withhold's pretty good. And so it's a bit of a one-stop shop because you can just walk down, give them injection, give them the vaccine and the drench in one. If we're going to use that, we're sort of pushing more and more to come in with something else like a dual active drench like this one. so that we're getting that triple active drench against the worms. Whether we use a long-acting product, it's usually better if it's used in older animals, and it depends on what you're going to do with your lambs, because you see when you get into the longer acting ones, we get longer withholds. So 91 days or 133 ESI for this one. We move up and we get into the combination drenches. These are your top shelf, your premium drenches. And the reason why we're saying that, there's a lot of these combinations are the newer ones, and they've got the most amount of actives in them. And generally, these are the ones that work better. However, not all drenches work the same on your farm as what they do on your neighbour's farm and their neighbour's neighbour. So you must really understand that just because, say, this drench or this drench worked on your neighbour's farm doesn't mean it's going to work on your farm. And one of the important things with fecal egg count reductions tests is we're really pushing to have those done every 3 years, because those parasites are always developing. So if we roll across to some of these drenches up here, so we have one of the newer ones, Zolvex Plus. It's got Abamectin and Montipan are one of the new products out, very, very effective. But we have some longer ESIs. So if you're dealing with, say, some crossbred lambs that you're looking at pushing off pretty soon, it might not be the best option. But if you've got merino lambs that you're going to be keep because they're going to be replacement use, it may be a good option. Whenever selecting your weaning drench, it's really important that it's different to your pre-lammer. So if you've come in with a StarTech as your pre-lammer, that's when you may think about using something else like the Zolvex, or you might come across to a Tridectin, because we don't want to be using the same product twice in a row. So with StarTech, if you had your pre-lammer done with another drench, it's got a newer active called Durquan, which has only been out for about 8 years now, and with Abamectin, withhold periods are pretty reasonable. So they're not too bad, but if you have got some tops in those lambs you want to get rid of quicker, that's when you may look at something along the lines of the Tridectin, where we've got the Moxie and the triple here, with shorter ESIs and a very short meat withhold. When we come across to Q-drench, a Q-drench is the only 4-way active, which has got the Abamectin, albendazole, closanil, and levamisole. But if you're on a farm which doesn't have barber's pole, this one is still just a triple active, because remember, the closanil is only effective against barber's pole. So it's really, really important that you know what parasites are on your farm. And 28 days, so quite a reasonable withhold for these guys. But the main thing I really want to push is don't just assume that all your drenches are going to work. And that's where it's really, really important that once you do a fecal egg count reduction test, you can have, it's almost like a bit of a cheat sheet on how you can actually control the parasites on your farm. So before you even walk into a reseller to think about what type of drench you're going to be used, you should have all the questions ready to go. What am I going to do? Are they going to be sold very soon? Am I going to hang on to these sheep? Am I maybe going to get rid of the wethers very soon? Because that's going to influence on what type of drench you're going to use. So if we haven't done a fecal egg count reduction test, we don't really know. You go in there, you buy your drench. One of the best things you can do is 14 days after you've given that weaning dose is collect fecal samples from those lambs. So just push them in the corner of a paddock. You leave them there for 10 minutes. Quite a lot of them will poop. Go out there, grab some fecal samples. And what we want to do is send it off to the lab and get a fecal egg count test performed. Now, ideally, it'd come back 0. If it comes back 0, it means there's no worms there. Looks like our drench worked 100%. But what happens if we come back and our egg count is at 100 eggs per gram? You say, well, I haven't killed all my parasites, but I don't really know what I started with. Because if your weaning dose, if at weaning they had an egg count of 1,000 and now it's 100, it means your drench worked at 90%. But if at weaning you had an egg count of 200 and now it's at 100, you only worked at 50%. So if you're going to think about doing a drench check, that's when it may be okay, or that's when it would be okay to actually do a fecal egg count at that weaning time. Now, this is the only way we can really check whether your drench is working. And I like to use the analogy that, say you've got a paddock that you're going to spray out, you're going to put a crop in, you're going to put some pasture in, so you come over with a burn spray, you spray it out with Roundup, and 3 or 4 weeks later you come back and you can see 30% of the grass still sitting there green. And you're going to go, oh, crikey, what's going on here? Did I not have the nozzles done correctly? Did I have the the rate wrong? Did I use hard water? But you can actually get a visual indication that something's not right. Now with drenches, we don't get that luxury. If we only had a 70% effective drench, the lambs would probably look okay. And it's usually only when we get down to 0% or very, very low efficacy that we see the problem, because if you're in barber spole area, 1 or 2 weeks later, they start dying on you. And you go, well, there's a big problem here. Unfortunately, by the time we see that, you've had a lot of subclinical losses going on. So fecal leg counts, they may seem dear, but I can assure you they're done strategically and done at the right times. They're a big investment on your worm control program. So to summarize it all, grazing management, I mean, fencing is probably one of the most effective tools that we have whenever we're trying to deal with parasites, because if we can let them die out on the pasture, they're not going to infect our animals. So that's why setting up that weaning paddock is vital for this sort of stuff, because you've got these young, stressed animals, and the last thing you want to do is put a big heap of worms in front of them. Co-grazing, so if you can't lock your paddocks up for that set period of time, maybe you graze it with some other animals. And the best animal to graze with is cattle. If you can graze those paddocks with cattle instead of sheep for a while before you put those lambs on it, it's fantastic, because the cattle will actually pick up the sheep parasites and they won't take. And if the cattle are shedding any cattle parasites, they shouldn't take in your lambs. One of the biggest things is nutrition. If you can really have all the requirements met with the trace elements, all the feed, if you put really good pasture in front of them, you're going to give that lamb the best shot, because as soon as you stress any sort of animal, the first thing that goes down is their immune system. Once their immune system goes down, they're more susceptible to diseases. And one of the biggest diseases we get is worms in sheep. The other way of thinking about it is watch out, because when the grass is growing, so are the worms, because the grass is only going to grow when it's got moisture and it's got temperature. And that's exactly what the worms require. So when this happens, and say we're weaning in October, so we've gone out, we've drenched them, we get some good spring rain, I'd say about 3 or 4 weeks after you've given the drench, let's go out and get some fecal egg counts and just really ensure that the egg count's not getting too out of hand. Because yeah, if that grass is growing, so are the worms, because they all require the same conditions. With that one, I'll go back to Alex, and thanks everyone for listening.
Great, thank you, Tim. No, really fantastic. Thank you, Tim and Paola, for those presentations. I'll just come back to me now. Guys, we do have a few questions coming through. If you do have any, please put them in the question box now, and we'll address them in just a minute. But before we do jump into questions, we do have a special promotion we are running just for you guys. Verbeck are currently giving away over $68,000 in prizes, including a Tapari HD4 sheep handler brought to you by Tridecton. To go into the draw to win, simply follow the link on your screen and let us know either how you have used Tridecton on your property, or if you haven't used it before, how you would use it on your property. And for those who don't know, we are also running a Multimin Performance Ready Challenge. It's a competition for sheep and cattle producers to share their experiences using Multimin. The grand prize is an overseas study tour for 2. And there's also heaps of free Multimin up for grabs as well. If you're interested in competing, we still have vacancies in round 4. You can sign up at multiminchallenge.com on your screen, or search Multimin Performance Ready Challenge on Facebook. And also tonight, we are launching a brand new Target Sheep platform. This platform covers all the key information covered by the webinar series, videos, articles, product information, links to all previous webinars, and much more. This is available for you to view now. Simply Google Verbeck Target Sheep or visit the website on your screen. Alrighty, there we go. All right, so moving on to questions now. We have a few that have come through. All right, first question, it looks like it is probably for Tim and Paola. How long after a drench, including selenium, can Multimin be used?
So if you use a drench including selenium, we should wait at least 2 months before using Multimin.
Perfect, that answers it. Next question, what's the difference between the sheep and cattle Multimin? I'm unable to get the sheep one. Will the cattle one be okay at a low dose?
No, they are different products. So Multimin for sheep is especially designed for sheep. It contains a more balanced levels in the selenium levels, so that improves the safety for sheep. So you cannot use the cattle product for sheep. They are different.
So that person,
different
yeah, no, thanks, Carla. So that person there, if you do want to send me an email or shoot me a text with some details, I can definitely follow that up for you. And we can definitely get some to you. So yeah, please follow up if you would like more information on that. Next question. I see Weaning has selenium and B12. Does that mean you cannot use it with Multimin?
No. When you use vaccines or drenches, including selenium, you cannot use at the same time as Multimin. So if you want to use Multimin, you need to choose vaccines not containing selenium. Containing B12 is okay, but not selenium.
Correct. And we do have a Weaning guard without selenium and B12 as well that is available too.
That's good.
All right, next question might be for Tim, this one. Maybe George. Recommendations for companies for fecal egg counts.
I think it really depends. You go, George.
One at a time.
No, I think Tim is most probably in a better position to answer. There is a quality control system currently run by WIMBOS. So as long as the lab that you use is accredited by WIMBOS, that should be fine.
Yep, yeah. Use an accredited lab, and also ideally get it to a lab as quick as you can, because the last thing you want to have is your sample sitting in the post for a week or so, because it may have detrimental effects on your worm eggs.
Great, thanks, guys. Next question: should I drench my lambs at marking as well?
I'll jump into this one. I'd say probably no. The only reason you would do that is if you are unable to prepare a lambing paddock and your ewes were getting quite wormy. You maybe didn't do a pre-lambing drench and all of a sudden the worms really popped up. But if you're worried about your worms prior to marking, I'd use your ewes as a bit of a sentinel and get a fecal egg count done from the ewes. If the ewes don't have very many worms in them at all, you can always be sure that your lambs at marking don't have many worms and wouldn't require it. And at marking, definitely don't drench while they're in the cradle. George, would you like to add any more to that?
No, I think you covered that well. Thanks, Tim.
Great, thanks, Tim. Next question: can I use the same active pre-lambing and then again at weaning? You covered this a little bit, Tim.
Ideally, no. Because if there's any worms that have survived that pre-lambing drench, they're the ones that the lambs are going to be picking up. So if you get that drench again, you may be selecting more for resistance. So that's why I think when, like I was saying, with those strategic drenches such as your pre-lammer, your weaner, and your first summer drench, you can try and plan those guys out and ideally make them all different.
Great, thank you. Next question: you spoke about Cyctin LA earlier on. When would you recommend us using Cyctin LA?
George, do you want to do that one?
Preferably use it when there's a very high infestation on pasture. So when you're trying to get the pasture infestation levels lower. So it depends on where you are. If you're in a winter rainfall area, and it depends on when you lamb as well. So if you're lambing in winter in a winter rainfall area, that's a good time to use your LA. If you're treating in summer, then and there's high levels of infestation on the pasture, then summer might be a good option as well. So it all depends on your operation, and but you use the long-acting when there's lots of worms in there on the paddock.
Thanks, George. Next question: are there drenches that are softer than others on lambs at weaning?
All the modern drenches are pretty good now. The only ones I really worry about are the Naphthalphos drenches, those organophosphates, because they are have the sort of lower the safety margin, but they're all pretty safe now. as long as you take your time when you're administering them, making sure that you put him down the animal properly.
Great, thanks, Tim. George, anything to add there?
No, just drench according to weight as well. If you overdose with products like levamisole 3 or 5 times, you may get issues.
Great, no, thanks, guys. That's all the questions we have this evening. So unless there's any more, we will wrap it up. Just to finish there, this is one of many in a series of webinars VBAC will be running this year. To see a full list, you can follow the link now on your screen or simply Google VBAC webinars. The next webinar will be held on the 21st of October. This will be our last target sheep webinar of the year, and we'll cover topics including why the summer drench is so important, how previous and future drenches will impact the drench choice in summer, when you should consider a second summer drench, what makes oxydectin so important to our sheep market in Australia. So with that, thank you all for attending tonight. We hope you got a lot out of the session. Thank you, Tim, Paula, and George for your time and your presentations this evening. A survey will pop up following this webinar. If you have the time, please take a couple of minutes to complete this survey. We very much appreciate it. You must fill this out to be eligible for the Tracking 1 Litre pack as well. Please keep an eye out for a follow-up email with all the important information from this webinar, including details on the tracking competition, full list of upcoming webinars, links to past webinars, and more. And thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your week. And to that person who's just commented through saying thank you for attending.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Goodbye.